It was supposed to be a solemn goodbye. But when that boy stepped through the cathedral doors dripping wet, holding a baby wrapped in pink, no one could have guessed the truth he carried would bring an empire to its knees. Rain fell in sheets that morning. The cathedral stood solemn under the grey skies, its stained glass windows flickering faint hues against the stone floor as Boston's elite filtered inside. Umbrellas folded, pearls glistened, black suits lined pews like uniformed shadows. The city was saying goodbye to two of its greatest benefactors, Jonathan and Rebecca Hamilton, philanthropists, founders of the Hamilton Foundation, and patrons of nearly every children's hospital in New England. At the front, in a seat reserved for morning blood, sat their only son, Nathan Hamilton -36, polished in a bespoke suit, his expression a carefully constructed mask. The media cameras outside had snapped him entering with poise, every step calculated, the perfect heir to a legacy of wealth, charity, and honor. No one knew the storm wasn't just outside. It was walking toward them. Just as Father Elias lifted the first page of the eulogy, the Hailey Cathedral doors groaned open. A gust of wind burst in, carrying with it the scent of wet pavement and fallen leaves, and all eyes turned. There, silhouetted in the doorway, stood a boy no older than 17, soaked to the bone, dark curls plastered to his forehead. In his arms, a baby no more than 6 months old, bundled in a faded pink blanket. Gasps echoed. Whispers erupted. Who is he? Is he lost? But it was the way Nathan's face drained of color, the way his knuckles whitened on the pew before him, that silenced everyone. He knew. And in that second, so did everyone else. The boy stepped forward, rainwater dripping from his clothes onto the cathedral's polished floor. "I'm sorry," he said, voice shaking but clear, as if rehearsed. "But before Jonathan and Rebecca are laid to rest, the truth needs to be told." The silence that followed was not hollow. It was heavy, expectant. "My name is Marcus Rivera. This baby," he looked down at the tiny girl now squirming gently in his arms. "Her name is Sophia, and she's their granddaughter." A collective gasp swept across the room. Nathan's hands twitched, but it wasn't him who broke the silence. An elderly woman in the third row, pearls trembling at her collarbone, dropped her handkerchief. She looks just like Rebecca did at that age," she whispered. It was Eleanor Hamilton, Jonathan's sister. Marcus took another step forward, emboldened. His voice grew steadier. "Sophia is the daughter of Isabella Rivera, my sister. She was your housekeeper for 2 years. She vanished last winter. And this..." He shifted the blanket to reveal an envelope tucked beside the baby. "This is why I'm here." 2 security guards moved forward down the aisle. But before they could reach him, Eleanor's voice rang out, sharp as ever. "Let the boy speak." The guard halted. Marcus exhaled. "She didn't disappear," Marcus continued, his voice cracking slightly. "She was silenced. She was hidden. And she left behind everything. Letters, a journal, and Sophia. She made me promise that if anything happened to her, I would come here today." At the mention of Isabella, Nathan shifted uneasily. Outside, the rain intensified. Thunder rolled low like a distant warning. Marcus lifted Sophia slightly in his arms. She stirred, then opened her eyes, bright gray-blue, unmistakable. And for a moment, even the most skeptical heart in the room faltered. "You told your parents you had no children," Eleanor said to Nathan, her voice shaking with restrained rage. "Was that true, or was that part of the lie?" Nathan rose slowly. His suit didn't seem so perfect now. His mouth opened, but no words came. "I have Isabella's journal," Marcus said, "and her letters. She wrote everything down, from the first gift, to the first threat, to the day she realized she couldn't trust the man who promised to love her." Gasps again. The journalists in the back had begun scribbling furiously. "She thought your parents would understand, Nathan. She thought they would welcome the truth and this baby. But instead," his voice broke, just briefly, she was sent away. Father Elias, who had yet to begin his sermon, slowly lowered his prayer book. Eleanor stood. Is she alive? Marcus hesitated. I don't know. I haven't seen her in weeks, but she left a trail, and she wanted the truth to come out, no matter what. He stepped forward and placed the envelope on the edge of the altar. In here, he said, are her last words and the truth about what really happened. Not just to Isabella, but to the Hamilton Foundation. A ripple moved through the mourners. People shifted in their seats. Someone stood up in the press section. Nathan's voice cut through finally. She's lying, he said. Marcus looked up. She never lied. You just never listened. Some truths don't whisper. They scream in ink, in memory, in the eyes of a child. The cathedral felt colder now, not because of the storm that howled outside, but because of the truth that had been cracked open like a sealed crypt. The letter sat on the altar, trembling in the gusts of wind sneaking through the ancient stone. So small, so harmless. And yet everyone knew it had the power to unravel decades of legacy, trust, and illusion. Marcus stood motionless, rain still dripping from the cuffs of his sleeves. Sophia stood softly against his chest, her pink blanket slightly damp, her breath shallow and innocent, completely unaware that she was the living symbol of a family's unspoken sins. The silence in the room was no longer expectant. It was sacred, as if heaven itself were holding its breath. Eleanor Hamilton stepped forward. At 71, she carried herself like marble. Grace sculpted from grief, strength burnished by sorrow. Her pearl earrings trembled with each step. She reached the altar and picked up the envelope with trembling fingers. For a moment, she simply stared at it, not out of fear, but out of knowing, because deep down, part of her had always suspected. The letter was long, the pages folded over and over like a secret begging to stay hidden. Eleanor began to read. Her voice, once crisp, once commanding, now floated like a whisper across the nave. To whoever finds this, my name is Isabella Rivera. I was a housekeeper, a daughter, a sister, and once, I believe I might become a part of the Hamilton family. But the only part they allowed me to play was the one that stayed silent. A low gasp escaped from somewhere near the front. Nathan Hamilton sat frozen, jaw clenched, face pale. Eleanor continued, I fell in love with Nathan. Or maybe I fell in love with the version of him he allowed me to see. The kind one, the thoughtful one, the one who promised he wasn't like the rest. But when I told him I was pregnant, the kindness vanished. In its place was calculation. Eleanor's voice cracked, and for a moment she lowered the letter. She closed her eyes just briefly, as if to steady the swirl of betrayal that pressed against her chest. Then she raised it again. They didn't yell. They didn't threaten me at first. They simply relocated me. A vacation, they called it. A beach house in Newport. No phone, no visitors, just silence. Except for the voice in my heart, reminding me this child, this little girl growing inside me, deserved more than shame. I named her Sophia. It means wisdom, because that's what she is. A sob broke from the third row. Even the stained glass saints on the cathedral window seemed to lean forward. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling Isabella in every word. He could see her hunched over the desk at that beach house, candlelight flickering, a diary beside her, her hands resting gently on her stomach. Eleanor turned the page. Nathan came to see me once. He said the foundation couldn't afford a scandal. He said, you don't understand how fragile this world is. One headline can burn everything my parents built. I asked him if that was all I was, a risk to be managed. He didn't answer. He left me there. The baby shifted again, as if sensing the pain in the room. Eleanor folded the last page slowly. There's more, she said, but that's enough for now. No one moved. Then softly, Eleanor stepped down from the altar. She walked slowly toward Marcus, her heels echoing with reverence. She didn't speak, only looked at the child in his arms. And for a long, suspended moment, Eleanor didn't see a scandal. She saw Rebecca. She saw Jonathan. She saw the future they would never get to hold. "May I?" she asked gently. Marcus hesitated, then placed Sophia into her arms. The moment the baby nestled into her chest, Eleanor's shoulders dropped. Not in weakness, but in surrender, a quiet acceptance that this was no longer about protecting a name. It was about saving a soul. "She has Rebecca's eyes," Eleanor whispered. Marcus nodded. "And Isabella's spirit." From the front pew, Nathan stood abruptly. "This is a witch hunt," he said, voice shaking but sharp. "It's a funeral for my parents, and you're hijacking it with lies." Eleanor turned slowly to face him. "No, Nathan," she said. "This letter isn't hijacking anything. It's rescuing what your parents actually stood for." "I loved her," he hissed. Eleanor raised a brow. Then why was she hidden? Why was she silenced? He had no answer. A man in a grey suit stood up from the side aisle. Tall, silver-haired, a cane in one hand and a briefcase in the other. "Thomas Warren," he said. "Legal counsel to the Hamilton Foundation." He addressed Marcus. "Do you have any corroborating evidence?" Marcus nodded. He pulled out a damp folder from beneath his jacket. "This is her journal, a copy. She hid the original in the nursery floor. She told me where. I didn't want to believe any of this at first, but then I read it." Thomas opened the folder, eyes scanning, his lips tightened. These are transaction records," he muttered. "Names of shell charities, discrepancies between reported donations and actual transfers." Nathan's face drained of color. Eleanor looked over Thomas's shoulder. "The foundation, was it compromised?" "It's worse than compromised," Thomas whispered. "It's been gutted from the inside." Another wave of gasps. From the back, someone called out, "Where is Isabella now?" Marcus looked down. "We don't know. She sent that letter 3 weeks ago. She gave it to an old housekeeper, Mrs. Chen. Then nothing. No calls, no messages, nothing." Eleanor stiffened. "Mrs. Chen," she whispered. "She was Rebecca's closest confidant. She would never abandon a promise." Marcus looked up. Then maybe she didn't. That night, Marcus stayed at the Hamilton estate. The press had already begun its frenzy. Cameras outside the cathedral. Headlines blazing across news feeds. "Boy storms billionaire funeral. Claims baby is hair. Hamilton Foundation under fire. Where is Isabella Rivera?" Inside the guest bedroom, Marcus watched the baby sleep. He sat by the window, rain still tapping gently against the glass. A storm now fading. In his hands was the letter Isabella had written him separately, a personal one. He hadn't shared it yet. Maybe he never would. "Dear Marcus, if I don't make it back, tell her I loved her with everything I had. Tell her she wasn't a mistake. Tell her the truth is always worth it. Even when it hurts, even when it costs you everything. Tell her I wanted her to be held in the same cathedral where her grandparents were buried. Because even if the people inside failed her, the love that built that place never would." Marcus folded the letter back slowly. Outside the window, a small patch of stars had broken through the clouds. He looked down at Sophia. "I'll find her," he whispered. "No matter what it takes. Sometimes the truth doesn't knock. It walks barefoot through a storm and carries its own thunder." Part 2. The Hamilton estate had always loomed like a monument to legacy, with its marble columns, sweeping staircases, and manicured hedges cut in perfect geometric shapes. It didn't look like a house. It looked like permanence. But that night, even marble seemed to tremble. Eleanor stood at the window of the drawing room, holding a glass of untouched brandy. Her eyes weren't focused on the rain pelting against the windows or the flickering street lamps beyond the iron gates. They were focused inward, on Rebecca's laughter, Jonathan's firm voice echoing in these very halls, and a child who bore their blood but had never met their arms. Down the corridor, Marcus sat beside Sophia's crib. She was finally asleep, wrapped in a fresh blanket, her tiny chest rising and falling like a whisper against the chaos of the day. He hadn't changed out of his damp clothes. There were some nights you didn't dress for. There were nights you survived. Downstairs in the Hamilton Library, Thomas Warren spread out copies of Isabella's journal across the oak table. The legal implications were devastating. Embezzlement, fraud, the weaponization of a charitable foundation meant to serve the sick and underserved. But it wasn't the financial crimes that haunted Thomas. It was the voice in Isabella's writing. I don't know who to trust anymore. I want to believe Nathan didn't mean to become this. That something inside him is still good. But good men don't put mothers in cages. Thomas removed his glasses, closed his eyes, and for the first time in his 30-year career, a tear rolled down his cheek. It was nearly midnight when the knock came. Not a rap, not a buzz, just one single thud followed by silence. Then again, 2 slow pounds. Not urgent, not timid. Eleanor turned her head. Marcus, downstairs now with Sophia resting on his shoulder, paused mid-step. Another knock. Then moved to the front doors. Eleanor reached first. Her hand hovered over the brass handle. Her breath caught, and then she opened it. Lightning cracked across the sky. There, standing in the downpour, soaked from head to toe, was a woman, thin, pale, wrapped in a trench coat 2 sizes too big. Her eyes, those unmistakable almond-shaped eyes, were wide with fear and fire. Her dark hair clung to her cheeks like ink on porcelain, and in her trembling hands was a black leather briefcase. "Isabella," Marcus whispered. She nodded once, and then collapsed. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She dropped to her knees in the rain, cradling Isabella's soaked form against her chest. "Get towels," she barked. "Call Dr. Mitchell, and turn off the goddamn cameras." Marcus crouched beside her. "She's breathing." Isabella's lips parted, barely audible. Where's Sophia?" Marcus held the baby closer, letting Sophia's small fingers rest on her mother's cold cheek. "Mama," he whispered. "She's here." Isabella smiled. A tiny, lopsided thing, like something half-remembered from a better life. Then she'd lost consciousness. 2 hours later, the storm had passed, but something far more powerful had begun to stir inside the Hamilton estate. Isabella lay in Rebecca's old bedroom, now converted into a quiet recovery room. Warm sheets, firelight, medical monitors blinking faint green. Eleanor sat beside her, one hand wrapped gently around Isabella's. Marcus paced near the fireplace, Sophia bundled on the couch in a sea of knitted blankets. Thomas Warren stood by the window, foam still warm from the district attorney's call. "She came back," Eleanor whispered, her voice cracking for the first time in years. "Dear God, she came back." Isabella stirred, her eyes fluttering open, unfocused at first. Then they found Sophia. She tried to sit up, but Eleanor pressed a hand to her shoulder. "You're safe," she said softly. Isabella blinked. Her voice was raspy, hoarse. "It's not over." Thomas stepped forward. "You have the briefcase." Isabella nodded toward the end of the bed. Eleanor retrieved it. Inside were 4 manila folders, 1 flash drive, and a small velvet pouch. She opened the first folder. Photocopies of tax records, internal memos, forged donation receipts. Thomas's jaw tightened. "These were taken from the Hamilton summer house," Isabella said, "hidden behind the wall in the nursery closet. He thought locking me there would make me obedient. He forgot I grew up hiding." Marcus moved to her side. "Why now? What changed?" Isabella looked at him, eyes hollowed by sleepless nights and hunger. "They found out I was trying to escape. The guards started asking questions. I had to move. Mrs. Chen helped arrange it. She took the original files to the press." "She's alive?" Eleanor asked. Isabella nodded weakly. "She's in hiding, but if the press runs the story tomorrow, the foundation won't be able to bury it." Thomas pulled out the flash drive. What's on this recordings? Isabella whispered, audio of Nathan, of him threatening me, of him talking about the money. Eleanor froze. Play it, she said. Thomas plugged the flash drive into the laptop beside the bed. A crackle, then a voice. Nathan's voice. You think you're doing the right thing, Isabella. You think this kid is some kind of moral leverage. You don't know how this world works. This foundation feeds cities. It controls votes. And if you ruin it, you ruin everything. Another clip. One baby, one mistake. Don't turn it into a war, Isabella. Just disappear quietly. The room went silent. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. Marcus whispered, he said he loved you. Isabella smiled bitterly. He loved control. Eleanor stood. Then let's take it away from him. The next morning, Boston woke to headlines that lit a match across the city. Hamilton Hare accused of fraud, blackmail, and forcing secret pregnancy into hiding. Exclusive audio recordings of Nathan Hamilton threatening former employee. By 9:00 a.m., the foundation's board was summoned to an emergency meeting. By 10:00, the Attorney General's office was on the line. By noon, Nathan Hamilton had vanished from public view. But the war was not over. Isabella stood before the board herself that evening. Pale but tall, worn but unbroken. Sophia sat in her lap. Eleanor stood at her side. Thomas Warren presented the evidence, audio, documents, journal pages, witness statements. Marcus watched as once powerful men shrunk into their tailored suits, as women who had once toasted Nathan at galas now stared at the floor in shame. Isabella finished with this. You call this a foundation, but real foundations are made of truth. And no child, no mother, no donor, and no legacy deserves to be built on lies. I don't want revenge. I want redemption. Not for me, but for her. She lifted Sophia gently into her arms. And for a moment, just a moment, the room remembered what it was built for. Not prestige, but purpose. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it walks in silence, sits beside the broken, and waits. Part 3, the courthouse was carved from old stone, weathered by centuries, stories, and storms. Its columns had seen roulets, parades, and verdicts that shifted the course of cities. But today it stood still, like a temple holding its breath for what would come next. A sea of cameras stretched across the marble steps. Microphones like sharpened swords pointed toward the doors, and then they opened. Nathan Hamilton stepped out of the black SUV like a ghost wrapped in designer wool. His hair was slicked, his jaw freshly shaven, but his eyes were hunted. He did not speak. 2 federal agents escorted him through the throng of reporters who yelled like wolves. Mr. Hamilton, do you deny the recordings? Where is the foundation's money? Is Sophie your daughter? But he kept walking, past the noise, past the flashbulbs, past the echoes of everything he used to be. Inside, the air was different, cool, sober, final. Marcus sat near the back, Sophia asleep in his arms. Isabella stood near the front, beside Eleanor and Thomas Warren. She wore no makeup, no silk, no mask, only steel. The courtroom swelled with tension as Judge Rachel Montgomery entered. An older woman with short silver hair, a reputation for razor-sharp integrity, and eyes that had seen through decades of deception. This court is now in session, the clerk announced. The people versus Nathan James Hamilton. Whispers rose like wind through dry leaves. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, the defendant is charged with the following: embezzlement of charitable funds totaling $47.6 million, conspiracy to commit fraud, unlawful confinement of a civilian, attempted coercion, and obstruction of justice. Nathan's lawyer, a sharp, polished man with the voice of a negotiator and the heart of a chess player, rose calmly. We plead not guilty on all counts. Gasps. Reporters leaned forward. Isabella did not flinch. Eleanor whispered, he's going to fight. Thomas Warren didn't blink. Let him. The truth has deeper roots than he thinks. The trial moved like a storm through spring. Exhibit A. Isabella's journal entries, handwritten, authenticated, detailing dates, names, and threats. Exhibit B. Audio recordings. Nathan's voice, clear, unmistakable, calculated. Exhibit C. Tax records, reprinted emails, and donation statements that did not match. Exhibit D. Testimony from Mrs. Chen, who had returned from hiding, her voice shaking, but her memory precise. And then came Isabella. She took the stand in a grey dress. No wedding ring, no bitterness, just a mother with the truth. The room silenced as she raised her right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. She sat, adjusted the microphone, and for a moment she looked at Nathan. He didn't meet her gaze, and so she began. I was 24 when I met Nathan Hamilton. I was hired to clean the guest wing at the Hamilton estate. I worked overtime most weekends. I never asked for favors. But Nathan, he noticed me. He was kind, and I was naive. We became close. At first, it felt like love. He told me stories of how he wanted to change the game, how he hated hypocrisy, how he was different from the other rich men. I believed him because I needed to. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought it would be difficult, yes, but I believed he would stand by me. He said, "This baby is a problem we can fix." Isabella's voice didn't break. It grew quieter. But in that quietness, the entire courtroom leaned forward. He sent me away. He told me it was for my health. But when I got there were no doctors, only a house with locked gates, only silence. I wasn't allowed to call my family. I wasn't allowed to leave. I wasn't allowed to exist. She opened her hand. Inside was a small gold chain. It had once belonged to Rebecca Hamilton. Mrs. Hamilton gave me this when she'd found out I was working double shifts. She said, "You remind me of myself when I was younger." I think if she had known about Sophia, she would have welcomed her, but she never got the chance. Marcus tightened his grip around Sophia in the back row. The judge looked toward the defense. Cross-examination. The lawyer stood. "No questions at this time, Your Honor." That night, Isabella stood on the balcony of the Hamilton estate. The city lights burned far away, but the stars were clear above her. Sophia slept in the nursery. Marcus stood at the doorway. "Do you think they believe me?" she asked. Marcus nodded. "It's not about belief anymore, Isabella. It's about proof. And you've given them everything." She turned. Her eyes were tired but not hollow. "I wanted to burn it all down once, just to make him feel what I felt." Marcus stepped closer. "And now?" She looked at the nursery window, where a soft light still glowed. "Now, I want something to survive the ashes." 2 days later, Nathan returned to court. But something in him had changed. His suit looked looser. His voice had lost its edge. He asked to speak. Judge Montgomery narrowed her eyes. "Proceed carefully, Mr. Hamilton." Nathan stood. No lawyer beside him. He cleared his throat. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect sympathy. I only want the truth to be spoken plainly. I destroyed what my parents built. I corrupted the mission they gave their lives for. I hurt the woman who believed in me, and I was too much of a coward to face what I became. I never meant to fall in love with Isabella, but I did. And when she got pregnant, I panicked. I thought I could buy time, hide her, delay the consequences." He turned to Isabella. "But you don't delay a child's heartbeat. You don't buy silence from a mother, and you don't outrun the eyes of your daughter." Tears ran down his face. "Sophia doesn't deserve my name, but she deserves the truth." He looked to the judge. "I plead guilty to all charges." Gasps erupted. His lawyer shouted, "Your Honor, we object to this." But the judge raised her hand. "It is his right." And then she looked at Nathan. "For the first time, Mr. Hamilton, you may have spoken like a man." Sentencing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Nathan was led away in cuffs. But as he passed by the back road, he paused. Marcus stood, Sophia in his arms. Nathan didn't say a word. He simply looked at the child, his daughter, for the first time not with power, but with apology. And Sophia, barely 1 year old, blinked once at him, then reached toward Marcus's collar and buried her face. It was over. Not the pain, not the rebuilding, but the lie. The Hamilton name had cracked, but what rose from its ruins was truth. The dust had settled. But not all ruins are meant to be mourned. Some are meant to be replanted. Part 4, it began with light. Not from the sky, not from chandeliers or stained glass, but from something simpler, the sound of Sophia laughing. That morning, as the first snow of December dusted the edges of the Hamilton estate, Sophia took her first step across the nursery floor, barefoot, arms outstretched, wobbling like a drunk ballerina toward Isabella's open arms. One step, two, a tiny tumble. But the laughter that followed was the kind that made old wallpaper look warm again. The kind that rewired grief, the kind that whispered, "We're still here." 3 weeks had passed since Nathan's sentencing. He had received 12 years, no parole for the first 6. He didn't speak much during the final hearing. Just listened, nodded, cried quietly when the judge read Rebecca's diary aloud. Her final entry, written the night before her death. "Nathan is struggling, but I still believe the child he once was. The one who used to sneak cookies to the orphanage staff. That boy is still in there somewhere. And maybe this grandchild we never met, maybe she'll be the one who helps him find his way back." Eleanor Hamilton now carried the legal authority to oversee the foundation, but she insisted on sharing it with Isabella. "You've walked through the fire," she said one evening over chamomile tea. "You know what the mission should look like now." Isabella hesitated. "I'm not a Hamilton," she said. "I'm a maid who fell in love with the wrong man." Eleanor placed her hand gently over Isabella's. "You're a mother who protected her child at all costs. You're the kind of woman Rebecca prayed her granddaughter would become. That is legacy." So the rebuilding began. The Hamilton Foundation was renamed the Sophia Foundation for Truth and Children. The change wasn't just cosmetic. For the first time in its history, the board included 2 single mothers who had once been helped by the foundation: a pediatric cancer survivor, a former accountant who had blown the whistle on a different nonprofit, and a young man named Marcus Rivera, Sophia's uncle, who now worked as the foundation's community outreach director. The gala ballroom was converted into a learning center, the wine cellar into a food pantry, and Rebecca's rose garden now grew vegetables for school lunch programs. One afternoon, Isabella found herself alone in the estate library, formerly Nathan's domain. The fire crackled softly, and sunlight filtered through the tall windows. She ran her fingers across the shelves, business manuals, family biographies, until she reached a plain blue box tucked between Legacy and Power and The Art of Negotiation. She pulled it out. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all from Nathan. The first was dated a week after sentencing. "Dear Isabella, they gave me paper, not freedom. But it's strange how stillness can make you hear your own thoughts louder. I thought I'd write for myself, but I ended up writing to you, to her, to Sophia. I watched the snow fall through a 4-inch window. It reminds me of the winter we met. You were humming something in Spanish. I didn't understand the words, but I remember the piece. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want to deserve memory. I want her to know. Her father wasn't always a coward. Sometimes he was just a broken boy trying to wear the crown of a man too soon." Isabella folded the letter and closed her eyes. There were tears, but not the sharp kind. These were softer, like rain over ash. That Sunday, the foundation held its first community day. Instead of black tie galas, there were folding tables, crock pots of soup, face-painting booths run by college volunteers. Eleanor stood near the coat rack, accepting hugs from nurses, teachers, even a janitor who'd once cleaned the hospital wing named after Jonathan Hamilton. Marcus worked the crowd, Sophia on his shoulders, handing out hand-knitted scarves from a basket. And Isabella. She was in the kitchen, hands flour-dusted, apron tied, teaching a dozen kids how to make her grandmother's empanadas. A little girl tugged on her sleeve. "Miss Isabella," she said, holding out a misshapen dough fold, "is it supposed to look like a turtle?" Isabella laughed. "Only if it tastes like hope," she said. That evening, after the dishes were done and the last guests had left, Isabella walked outside. The estate was quiet. Snowflakes drifted like falling feathers. She sat on the bench beneath the old oak tree, the one Jonathan planted the day Nathan was born, and beside her sat Eleanor. Neither spoke for a while, until Eleanor said, "Do you remember what Rebecca used to say every time the garden lost a tree?" Isabella shook her head. She'd say, "Good. Now there's room for something new." A soft breeze stirred. From the nursery window upstairs, the faint sound of Sophia's laughter floated down. It wasn't just a child's giggle. It was a resurrection. In the weeks that followed, the Sophia Foundation helped reopen 3 health clinics. They launched a scholarship program for first-generation college students. And they released a full transparency portal online showing every dollar spent and every hand it touched. Isabella became the face of change, but she refused interviews. "Let the work speak," she said. Still, her name began to appear in editorials, not as a scandal, not as the maid, but as the mother who rebuilt a legacy. One morning, Marcus found her in the reading room, staring out the window. "You okay?" She nodded, just thinking about Nathan. She didn't answer right away, then quietly, "He was a monster, but not born one." Marcus didn't argue. "Do you think Sophia will want to know him someday?" "She'll know the truth," Isabella said. "The whole truth. But the story I want her to carry isn't about who failed. It's about who chose to rise. There are prisons with walls, and there are prisons made of regret. The cell was small, 8 steps from wall to wall. One rusted sink, one steel bed, one window that didn't open, but let in just enough light to remind you the world was still out there. Nathan Hamilton had traded mahogany desks and crystal tumblers for concrete and silence. His suit had been replaced with a navy jumpsuit, his name embroidered above the heart like a brand of humility. He had chosen to plead guilty, but guilt wasn't a sentence. It was a sentence he rewrote every day on paper. It started with a notebook smuggled in by a sympathetic guard. Then more followed. Letters, pages torn from legal pads, corners dog-eared, handwriting growing more raw with each entry. He never expected them to be read. But he wrote them anyway, to Sophia, to Isabella, to the ghost of his mother who still visited him in dreams, always holding a basket of apricots and asking, "Why are you hiding behind your father's voice again?" Letter number 8. Dear Sophia, you don't know me yet, and part of me hopes you never do. At least not the version of me that stood in a courtroom and tried to pretend he wasn't afraid. Your name means wisdom. Your mother chose that name while locked in a house I paid for. A house with bars she never deserved. I don't write you to be remembered. I write because silence is a coward's last refuge, and I've lived there too long. In the Hamilton estate, Isabella sat at the kitchen table one quiet morning, the newest letter in her hands. Eleanor brought over 2 mugs of tea, placing one beside her. "He's writing again?" she asked softly. Isabella nodded. "Once a week, every Sunday." "Do you read them?" "I do." "Do you answer?" "No." Eleanor didn't press. She just sipped her tea, her eyes on Sophia playing by the fireplace, stacking blocks, knocking them down, giggling like forgiveness never needed to be taught. Letter number 12. Dear Isabella, I remember the first time I watched you fold a napkin. It was at my mother's charity luncheon. You didn't know anyone was watching, but the way your fingers moved. It was like origami and reverence in one. I fell in love with that. Not the napkin, the care. You took care with everything. My shirts, the flowers in the entry hall, your brother, your life. and I took that care and twisted it into fear. They say prison is about punishment. But the worst punishment is memory. And every memory of you is a mirror I can't walk past anymore. That evening, Marcus found Isabella in the reading room, the lights dim, one of Nathan's letters still open in her lap. He hesitated. "You okay?" Isabella didn't look up right away, then softly, "Do you think people can truly change?" Marcus leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "I think most people don't, but some do, and when they do, it hurts like hell." Meanwhile, inside the prison, Nathan started teaching. It began by accident. One of the other inmates, a man who hadn't held a pen since middle school, asked if Nathan could help him write a letter to his daughter. Nathan did more than help. He rewrote it 5 times until it stopped sounding like apology and started sounding like truth. Word spread. Soon he was hosting writing circles every Thursday night. They called it the Page Room, a place where men who had forgotten how to speak remembered how to feel. Letter number 17. Dear Sophia, your hands probably smell like glue sticks and crayons by now. I hope they also smell like trees, like chalk, like sunlight. I hope you're making messes and calling them masterpieces. I won't be there to pick you up from school, to scare your first boyfriend, to walk you down an aisle if you ever choose one. But I will always be the voice on the page reminding you. You are not the mistake that brought you here. You are the miracle that changed everything after. One snowy afternoon, Isabella stood at the fireplace with Eleanor. The room smelled like cinnamon and pine. Marcus entered, holding an envelope. "It's from the prison," he said, offering it without comment. Isabella opened it, but this time it wasn't a letter. It was a drawing. Crude pencil on paper. A little girl holding hands with 2 silhouettes. One with long hair, one with short. The background was a field of tulips, and on the back, just 2 words. One day. Isabella didn't cry. She smiled, then folded it and slipped it into the drawer beside Sophia's birth certificate. Letter number 23, unsent. Dear Isabella, today one of the men in the page room asked me how I would describe you in 1 sentence. I said she's the kind of woman who survives the storm and then teaches the rain how to fall softer. I don't deserve to know you, but I will spend the rest of my life making sure Sophia knows what kind of woman her mother is. Nathan never asked to see Sophia. Not once, but once a month he sent a new book to the Sophia Foundation's library. Always for children. Inside each one, handwritten on the first page, to Sophia, may your story always be written in courage. N.H. One spring morning, Isabella visited the garden with Sophia. The tulips were blooming. Red, white, soft pink. Sophia ran ahead and pointed. Look, Mama, new flowers. Isabella knelt beside her. Yes, she whispered. We planted them last fall. Sophia tilted her head. You mean in the cold? Isabella smiled. Exactly. Sometimes the hardest part of rebuilding is knocking on the same doors your name once closed. Part 5. The first stop was Maple Haven Pediatric Center, a small clinic on the south side of Boston, built from second-hand brick and volunteer hope. Isabella stood outside the building as wind stirred fallen leaves across the walkway. Her palms were sweaty despite the cold. Eleanor stood beside her, perfectly poised in her winter coat, but her eyes were softer than usual. You don't have to do the talking, Eleanor said. I do, Isabella replied. It was my silence that helped break them. My voice should help repair them. She took a breath, then pushed the door open. The clinic hadn't changed much since the scandal, but it had aged. The paint had peeled in corners. The donation plaques looked tired, and the waiting room chairs, once filled with children's laughter, were mostly empty. Behind the counter stood a woman in her 50s, white coat, stethoscope, and eyes that once carried warmth, but now guarded the doorway like steel. Isabella Rivera, she said flatly. Eleanor Hamilton. Didn't expect either of you to walk in here again. Eleanor stepped forward. Dr. Liu, we're not here for show, and certainly not for forgiveness. Just for 10 minutes. 5. Dr. Liu said, and not a second more. They sat in a small side office with faded art on the walls, hand-drawn hearts and stick figures holding balloons. Isabella's hands rested on her lap still. Dr. Liu didn't smile. Do you know how many children we had to turn away after the Hamilton funds disappeared? Isabella nodded slowly. I do. 17, Dr. Liu said. 17 cases. Leukemia, cystic fibrosis, asthma so severe one child collapsed in school. We begged the city for help. They said the Hamiltons would make it right. But all we got was silence. Isabella swallowed. That silence was me. I didn't mean to be complicit, but I was. I believed lies. I let fear write my choices. And I'm here not to ask for a second chance, but to earn one. Dr. Liu raised an eyebrow. With what? Eleanor opened a folder. Full restitution. Every dollar promised plus 22% interest for the time lost, backed by the restructured Sophia Foundation. No strings, no branding. Dr. Liu leaned back, crossing her arms. And how do I explain this to families who watched us fail? Tell them, Isabella said quietly, that a mother came back. Not just for her daughter, but for theirs. There was silence. Then Dr. Liu stood. I'll think about it, she said. That's all I can promise. Isabella nodded. That's more than enough. The second visit was worse. New Roots Learning Center, a non-profit for refugee children. Its founder, a stern woman named Grace Ibarra, greeted them not with suspicion, but with grief. You come wearing new colors, she said, but the fabric is still stitched with the same name. We're not trying to erase the past, Eleanor said. I hope not, Grace replied, because every wall in this building remembers it. She led them to a supply closet. Inside, rows of unused school books labeled donated by the Hamilton Foundation. Brand new, never distributed. Why weren't they used? Isabella asked. Grace turned, her voice sharp. Because the donation was a cover-up. We received books the same week we were denied medical funds for 4 children. Someone wanted to say, look, we still care, but not where it truly mattered. Isabella closed her eyes. Grace softened, just slightly. Do you know what betrayal looks like to a 7-year-old? She asked. It looks like silence where a teacher used to be. That night, Isabella sat by the fireplace in the estate library. Sophia slept upstairs, Marcus reading near the window. Eleanor entered with 2 mugs of tea. How bad was it? She asked. Isabella didn't answer right away. They looked at me the way I used to look at mirrors when I couldn't recognize myself anymore. Eleanor sat down beside her. That means they still see something. You can't hate a ghost, but you can be angry at someone who's real. Isabella smiled faintly. I'd rather be hated for being real than pitied for pretending. The turning point came at the St. Martin Shelter, an emergency center for unhoused families, one of the very first places Rebecca Hamilton ever funded. When Isabella and Eleanor walked in, a young boy ran to them. Are you the soup ladies? He asked brightly. Isabella smiled. Close. We're the truth ladies. The boy giggled. Truth soup sounds spicy. The boy's mother approached. The early 30s, tired eyes, but kindness etched in her every feature. I know who you are, she said to Isabella. And I also know what you've done since. Isabella blinked. How? The woman reached into her pocket and pulled out a drawing. It was a picture of a house with tulips and a stick figure mom holding a baby. Underneath, Sophia's place, where hope lives. My daughter drew this, the woman said. She's heard your story at school, from her teacher. You gave her back her lunch program. Isabella's voice caught in her throat. I didn't know anyone was watching. The woman smiled. They always are, especially the ones you never expect. In the weeks that followed, the Sophia Foundation launched a campaign called We Return. It wasn't a press release. It was a series of unannounced visits, handwritten notes, apology dinners, and restitution packages delivered in silence. They didn't ask for thanks. They just showed up again and again, until the doors began to say open just a little longer. One Sunday afternoon, back at the Hamilton estate, Isabella found an envelope on her desk. There was no return address. Inside, "Dear Isabella, I heard you went back to Maple Haven. I heard you stood in front of every place my name once poisoned. I don't know how to undo what I did, but I'm glad someone does. Tell Sophia, the name she carries is not the one I destroyed. It's the one you rebuilt." And Isabella closed her eyes, then smiled. That evening, she walked out to the garden where tulips were starting to bloom early, confused by an unusually warm winter. She knelt down, Sophia beside her, and gently dug her fingers into the soil. "What are we planting?" Sophia asked. Isabella looked up at the sky. "Trust," she said softly. "It takes the longest to grow, but when it blooms, it changes everything." Part 6. Not all fathers arrive with a title. Some arrive by staying. Marcus Rivera had never wanted to be anyone's hero. He was the kind of guy who blended into crowds. The kind who remembered birthdays but forgot his own keys. He carried his grief quietly, like folded laundry, neat, contained, and yet somehow fate had placed a child in his arms. Not his daughter, but somehow entirely his. It was a Thursday afternoon when it happened. Isabella was at a conference, meeting with Eleanor, finalizing the foundation's partnership with 3 public schools. Sophia had begged to go, but Isabella promised they'd bake cookies together afterward if she stayed with Uncle Marcus. Marcus wasn't worried. He'd babysat Sophia dozens of times. They had their rituals: peanut butter sandwiches shaped like stars, impromptu sock puppet performances, and bedtime stories that turned into whispered adventures about princess astronauts and dragon doctors. But this day was different, because Sophia didn't wake up from her nap. He found her curled in the blankets, cheeks flushed, lips slightly parted. At first, he thought she was just warm. Then she stirred and let out a sound that didn't belong to a child. It was a wheeze, ragged, sharp, wet. Her eyelids fluttered, and when they opened, her eyes went bright. They were lost. "Hey, hey," Marcus whispered, scooping her up. "Hey, superstar, what's going on?" She didn't answer. Her tiny fingers clutched at his shirt like she was searching for something solid in a storm. And that's when he heard it again. Another wheeze, deeper, followed by a shudder through her chest. Panic lit the back of his throat, but Marcus didn't panic. He moved. The emergency room smelled like antiseptic and waiting. Marcus didn't remember how he got there. Only that one moment he was buckling her into the car seat with trembling hands, and the next he was standing under fluorescent lights, Sophia in his arms, whispering over and over, "She's 3. Her name's Sophia." She started wheezing out of nowhere. No known allergies. Her mom's on the way. Please, just, please. A nurse took her. Marcus didn't let go easily. When he finally did, the weight in his arms remained. 3 hours later, Isabella burst into the pediatric wing, hair windswept, face pale with fear. Marcus stood in the hallway outside Sophia's room, pacing in tight, mechanical steps. "Marcus," she called. She ran into his arms before he could say another word. "I'm sorry," she breathed. "I shouldn't have." "She's okay," he whispered into her hair. "They said it's respiratory inflammation, viral maybe. She's on oxygen, but she's stable." Isabella pulled back. "But you, how did you?" Marcus shook his head. There wasn't time to question. I just moved." Isabella looked at him, really looked at him. And for the first time since Sophia was born, she saw something in her brother's eyes that went beyond loyalty. She saw love that had weight. Not protective love, paternal love. That night, after Sophia was settled, tubes gently hissing by her side, Marcus sat beside her bed. Isabella had stepped out for a moment, needing air. And Marcus? He just watched her breathe. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a book, a worn copy of The Little Prince. It was Sophia's favorite. He began reading in a low, steady voice. "And when you've done that, come back to me, and I'll give you 1,000 sunsets." Sophia stirred, eyes still closed, but her lips moved faintly, repeating the line she knew by heart. Marcus stopped, his throat tightened. He leaned forward and kissed her forehead. And for the first time in his life, he whispered the words he had never dared say, "I love you, Sophia. Not just because you're my sister's daughter. Not just because you're Rebecca's legacy, but because you are mine too, in every way that matters." The next day, when they returned home, Sophia was stronger. Her laugh came back, softer, but real. And Marcus? He didn't go back to being just the funny uncle. Something had shifted. The staff at the foundation began calling him the quiet dad. He didn't correct them. Eleanor noticed. One morning, she found him packing Sophia's lunch for preschool. He carved her apple slices into stars. "She won't eat them unless they sparkle," he explained. Eleanor tilted her head. "Do you realize you've become the most consistent man in her life?" Marcus smiled. "I'm not trying to replace anyone." "I know," she said. "That's why you are." That evening, a letter arrived at the estate from Nathan. Marcus opened it in the kitchen alone. Inside, "Dear Marcus, thank you. I don't say it lightly, because I know what it cost you to pick up where I dropped everything, to be what I wasn't man enough to be. I used to think fatherhood was something inherited. Turns out it's something chosen. And you chose her. Take care of her for both of us. Tell her the stars taste sweeter in apple slices." And that night, Marcus placed the letter in Sophia's keepsake box, beside her hospital bracelet, the first crayon drawing, and a pressed tulip from the garden. He looked up at the stars through the nursery window. Sophia slept peacefully, her tiny hands tucked under her chin, a soft whistle in her breath from the healing in her lungs. Marcus whispered, "You'll never have to wonder who shows up for you. I'm already here." Part 7. Sometimes the hardest truth to tell is your own. The email arrived on a quiet Wednesday morning. It came with no warning, no subject line screaming for attention, just a name in the sender field. Olivia Morgan, Horizon Publishing. Isabella almost deleted it without reading. She was folding laundry. Sophia's tiny socks, Marcus's button-downs, the rhythm of a quiet life she'd earned stitch by stitch. But something made her stop. She opened the email. "Dear Ms. Rivera, your story has reached far more people than you might imagine. We believe that a full account from your voice could shift culture, rebuild trust in philanthropy, and offer healing to survivors who never got a chance to speak. We are formally inviting you to write your memoir. Working title, The House They Tried to Bury Me In. Advance, $250,000. Creative control, 100% yours. If you say no, we'll never ask again. But if you say yes, we believe your voice could change more than a name. It could change the narrative of what it means to rise. Sincerely, Olivia Morgan, Senior Editor, Horizon Publishing." Isabella read it 3 times, then closed her laptop, then walked outside into the garden where tulips were just beginning to lean into the spring light. She didn't breathe for a full minute. Marcus found her there 20 minutes later. "You okay?" She handed him the phone. He read silently, then whistled low. "That's a lot of money." "It's not about the money," Isabella said. Marcus nodded. "Then what is it about?" She looked at the tulips. "It's about digging through the dirt again, in public. Knowing my pain might be packaged. Knowing my daughter's name might be sold like a headline. Knowing Nathan's worst moment might become someone else's Netflix binge." She paused. "But also knowing it could help someone else survive." That night, Eleanor joined them at the dinner table. The topic was inevitable. "I think you should consider it," she said softly. Marcus blinked. "Really?" Eleanor nodded. Because if you don't tell the story right, someone else will tell it wrong. She sipped her tea. And Sophia deserves to read the truth someday. Not just whispers, not just clippings, but your truth. On your terms. Isabella stared at her plate, then finally whispered, "I'm not afraid of the truth. I'm afraid of how many pieces of me it'll cost to put it on a page." Eleanor reached across the table. "Then bleed carefully, but don't silence yourself." That night, Isabella wrote one word in her notebook. Why? Then she stared at it for hours, until Sophia woke from a dream, crawled into her bed, and curled against her chest like she used to as a baby. No words, just breath. The next morning, Isabella opened her laptop and typed out her response. "Dear Olivia, thank you. Your offer is kind, brave even. I spent the last 3 years trying to forget the sound of locked doors. Trying to forgive a man who once loved me wrong. Trying to raise a daughter in peace, not in echoes. But silence is only healing when it grows into strength. And I think mine has. Yes, I'll tell the story, but not for headlines, not for numbers, not even for closure. I'll tell it for the next woman who gets locked in a metaphorical mansion. For the next child who grows up wondering if they were born from scandal or from love. For the next foundation board that learns money without accountability is rot wearing a tie. I'll tell it because truth is never the enemy. Fear is. Let's begin." The project took 8 months. Isabella wrote in the early mornings before Sophia woke, with coffee gone cold beside her. Sometimes Marcus would find her crying over a single paragraph. Other times, she would laugh, remembering Rebecca's dry sarcasm or Jonathan's avocado obsession. She did not portray herself as a saint. She showed her doubt, her denial, her moments of almost giving up. And she showed Nathan too, not as a villain, not as a victim, but as a man who lost himself between pressure and pride, and paid the price for both. When the manuscript was done, she printed the last page, pressed her hand to it, and whispered, "Now it belongs to the world." The book launched quietly. No tour, no morning show appearances, just a small hardcover in a deep navy dust jacket with gold lettering. "The House They Tried to Bury Me In" by Isabella Rivera. The dedication read, "For Sophia. May you never have to fight to be believed. But if you do, may your voice be louder than mine ever was." The first email came from a high school teacher in Chicago, then a social worker in Detroit, then a woman in Montana who wrote, "I've never said this out loud before, but you gave me permission to name what happened." The book hit the New York Times bestseller list by week 3. But what mattered more, the Sophia Foundation's donor base tripled within 6 weeks, because people didn't just believe Isabella. They believed in the power of truth told with tenderness. One rainy afternoon, a letter arrived. The handwriting was unmistakable. "Dear Isabella, I bought your book. Don't worry. I didn't read it for absolution. I read it for the things I forgot to see. The hallway you walked down every day. The ache you folded into sheets. The voice you buried to protect mine. Thank you for not erasing me, even when I erased you. The final chapter broke me. Not because you forgave me, but because you didn't let me off the hook. You showed mercy without surrender. I hope someday Sophia reads it and knows she came from courage, not scandal." And Isabella folded the letter slowly, then walked to the fire and slipped it between the pages of her journal. That night, as Sophia fell asleep beside her, Isabella whispered into her hair, "You are the story they never expected, and I am the voice they tried to silence." She looked out the window, the rain tapping softly against the glass. But we're still here, page by page, bloom by bloom, voice by voice. Some children are born from silence, but raised by voices that refuse to disappear. Epilogue: the study on the 3rd floor of the Hamilton estate had changed little in the 14 years since Isabella last stepped inside. The curtains were new. The wallpaper was soft gray now, not navy, but the scent of the room, lavender and old paper, still wrapped itself around you like memory. Sophia was 17. She stood barefoot by the window, the late afternoon sun painting her skin in honey tones. A soft breeze rustled the tulips below. Her mother was out planting them with Marcus, who still insisted on cutting Sophia's sandwiches into stars even when she rolled her eyes and laughed. "I'm practically an adult, you know." But today, Sophia had asked for time alone, because today she was ready. She found the blue box behind a row of books labeled Legacy, Foundations, and Healing Through Philanthropy. She pulled it out gently. Inside, her hospital bracelet, a pressed tulip, a folded drawing of her with two tall stick figures, and dozens of envelopes. She opened the first. "Dear Sophia, you won't remember me. That's a mercy I've never stopped being grateful for. But there are things I need you to know, because where you came from is not the same as what you are. You were never a mistake. You were a choice, again and again, made by people who loved you more than they feared the world. And you became the light we forgot we could hold." Sophia smiled softly, then opened the next one. It was Isabella's handwriting. "Sophia, if you're reading this, it means you're ready. Ready not to carry the weight of the past, but to understand the shape of it. I want you to know there were days I didn't know if I'd see your first word, your first steps, your first laugh, and now you're reading, and I can finally breathe. You are not just my daughter. You are my victory." Sophia kept reading, letter after letter. Some were short, some were pages long. Some were from Mrs. Chen, the old housekeeper, who once said that Sophia reminded her of the way Rebecca Hamilton used to hum on quiet mornings. Some were from Thomas Warren, who had helped rebuild the foundation, but always referred to Sophia as the North Star of it all. But one envelope, tucked furthest back, stopped Sophia's breath. The ink was faded, the handwriting slightly slanted. The initials, NH. She paused, then opened it. "Sophia, I don't deserve this page, but I've written it anyway, because I don't know how long I have left to say the words that should have been whispered at your crib, at your birthday cakes, at every moment I forfeited when I chose fear over fatherhood. I'm Nathan. I'm the reason your mother had to fight for you, and I will never ask you to forgive me for that. But I hope someday you understand. The moment you were born, the world had a second chance, and that chance came with your name. Sophia, it means wisdom, and you are exactly that." Sophia folded the letter and held it to her chest. She didn't cry, not out of strength, but because sometimes peace feels like silence finally releasing its breath. That evening, she found her mother and Marcus in the garden. The tulips were taller this year. Sophia joined them, kneeling beside her mother. "Mom," she said softly, because sometimes she liked calling her by her name when the air felt sacred. "I read everything." Isabel looked up. "You okay?" Sophia nodded, then handed her a small notebook. Isabella opened it. On the first page, "The Girl Who Read Her Own Beginning" by Sophia Rivera Hamilton. "I want to tell the rest of the story," Sophia said, "from my side. Not about the scandal, not about the court, but about growing up surrounded by people who rebuilt their lives and still had room for me. I want to write about tulips, about letters, about peanut butter stars, and what it means to be raised by love instead of fear." Isabella wiped a tear. Marcus smiled. Eleanor, watching from the porch, raised her glass of iced tea. That night, Sophia sat at her desk, opened her laptop, and began to type. "I was born in a storm, but raised in a garden. I am the daughter of silence and voice, of sorrow and repair, of mistakes and mercy. My name means wisdom, but what I've learned is this. The real wonder is that people stayed, and because they stayed, I grew."